Thanks, Debbie. Like she said, my name is Andy Shank. I am the Director of Special Investigations for the State Board of Accounts. See my contact information on the screen. It'll be there at the end as well. I was supposed to speak tomorrow in the afternoon, I believe, so there's been a little schedule flip-flopping, and I'm told that my presentation isn't online yet, if you were wanting to relive this excitement on your own later, but it will be there later this week, so don't worry. My contact information will show up at the end of the presentation as well if you missed it. So a little bit about me. Anytime I go to these things and I hear someone speak, I like to know whether I should respect them or not, or believe them, or where they came from, what they've seen, and I'll let you guys be the judge of that. But I am born and raised in Indy. I'm a Ben Davis grad. Anyone else? So born and raised on the west side. I went to American University in Washington, D.C. for my undergrad. It's in justice. I started out pre-med chemistry, so, you know, we all find our ways through different paths. I started with the state police in 2001. Immediately out of college, I went to go work for Citibank in New York City, and I was a consultant out there, and I actually commuted through the World Trade Center every morning, and I got sick of the corporate grind and the hour-and-a-half commute each way to work every day, so I resigned in right around January of 2001. So I came back home to Indiana, and then 9/11 happened 8 months later, so it was sort of a subconscious sign to me that I was making good decisions, hopefully. So I started the State Police Academy in July of 2001. I never really thought I would be a police officer. It was never really something I thought I would do in my entire life, but my degree was in justice. I'd always been the kid that loved watching cops, and I was like, I didn't like the corporate grind, and let's try it. You know, I'm 22, I'm crazy, let's go drive really fast and chase people. So I started the State Police Academy in July of 01, finished in December of 01, and then immediately got sent to Lake County. So I did my first 2 years in northern Lake County, so Gary, Hammond, East Chicago, and all that. And in the state police, they don't tell you where you're getting sent until week 17 of the academy. And my interpretation of that is, if they told me in week 1 that I'm going to Gary, I'm probably not going to make it to week 22. So when week 17, they tell you you're too deep to quit at that point. But I literally had the feeling I'm going to die. And I didn't, and it was some of the best experience of my career. I saw more things in 2 years up there than I think some of my former coworkers saw in the 14 years they've been on. So it's an interesting section of the world up there, in some very wonderful ways and some ways that could need a lot of improvement. So I kind of bounced around on the state police. I came down to Indy in about 03, worked the road for a while. I got transferred to governor's security, so I was on Mitch Daniels' personal security detail, sort of the Secret Service on the state level. That was during his campaign time, so it was incredibly hectic. And there was that flood down in this neck of the woods too, shortly after. So I'm, up at 3 a.m. getting in a Black Hawk to go down here to survey the flood damage at the hospitals and all that stuff down here. So it was a crazy, hectic time. It was a very interesting insight to the way that a campaign works. I don't want to do it again, but it was a good moment in my career. So in about 05, I decided that I needed to kind of take another step in another direction. So I actually resigned from the state police to start law school full-time in Indianapolis. Did that for 3 semesters, and then I got tired of being a broke, unemployed student. So I begged the state police to take me back, and came back in, I think, November of 06. Kind of went back to just being a detective, working the road, that stuff. And then in 09, a vacancy came up to be assigned to the FBI Mortgage Fraud Task Force. Now, that doesn't sound very exciting, because it's not. Mortgage fraud is not thrilling. And luckily for me, only 2 people from the entire state police put in for the vacancy, so there wasn't a heck of a lot of competition for it. So I got it. So I did mortgage fraud for a couple years, which is a great entryway to just white-collar crime and fraud. I mean, it's very detail-oriented, documents, subpoenas, time, effort, spreadsheets, all that stuff that you guys are probably very familiar with. Well, the FBI is they're very targeted in what they really focus on. right after the, '09 is kind of the tail end of the financial meltdown. And, I could talk to you all for half a day on why the banks are behind all of that. And it was just awful. And I hate banks. If I could keep my money in my mattress and make any interest on it, I would do that. But you can't. But once the silver lining to the financial meltdown was that mortgages became a lot harder to get. And that stinks for honest people like you or I, but it's good because they were so painfully easy to get beforehand. I mean, they had products called no-doc loans where anybody could walk into a mortgage broker and say, you're in like cut-off jeans and a tank top, but you tell them you're a neurosurgeon and you make $400,000 a year, and they just write it down. How much money do you have in the bank? $750,000, write it down, and poof, you're approved for $1 million loan. And people were just doing this over and over again because they just sold the mortgages up the line and nobody really cared. And on that note, there's a book called The Big Short, if anybody's ever heard of it, and there's going to be a movie coming out in December on it. I highly recommend it. It's written by the same guy that did Moneyball, so it's a very readable, it's kind of a financially technical book, but it's a very readable book as well. So if you want to learn about why banks are evil, read The Big Short. So as mortgage fraud kind of stopped being the focus of the FBI, it switched back toward just general financial crimes. So Ponzi schemes, Tim Durham type stuff. I don't know if anybody, I don't mean to tout my TV appearance this past week, but if you've ever heard of the show American Greed, I was on that last Friday night for a case of mine, William Konauer, personal injury attorney in Indianapolis. So the focus went away from mortgage fraud and into just more general financial crimes. The focus then split again in about 2013, and it went more public corruption. So that's dirty cops, dirty politicians, all that stuff. So I worked on the Indy Land Bank case in Marion County. That was my case. I don't know, where are my Marion County people? Are you here? Do you remember when the FBI van pulled up outside the city-county building? Yeah, that was me. So sorry about that. But you didn't have anything to do with it at all. So the long story is, it brings me to when I accepted this job in June. And Paul Joyce, who is the grand poobah of the State Board of Accounts, he and I had worked together on several things, and he saw that my resume and background could really take the State Board of Accounts to the next level. I think the way that I always put it, the State Board of Accounts does amazing work when it comes to auditing and accounting projects. But when you slap that down to a detective or a prosecutor, their eyes just cross and they go, I don't know what to do with that. Because it's too good, it's too complex, it's too detailed. And my job is to kind of take that detailed product and distill it down to the bare minimums of what is necessary for a criminal prosecution. That's sometimes ignoring the $100 that somebody stole out of the petty cash and focusing on the $50,000 that they used to buy themselves a car, things like that. The State Board of Accounts cannot ignore any of that stuff because, your auditors, their CPAs, they're not happy until both sides balance. And in the criminal world, it's just different. So my job is to basically make sure that more of our investigations that reveal criminal conduct actually make it to criminal prosecutions. And I use my network. I still have good contacts with the FBI. I mean, some of them were at my wedding, state police. I still talk to my old boss almost every day. So both of those entities are kind of tough nuts to crack. If you don't know them, they don't return your calls. If they don't know you, they don't care what your information is. And I've got a pretty good in with both of them, and I just text message them, and we go grab a slice of pizza, and we talk about a new case. And I didn't realize how kind of exclusive that club is until I was on the outside, and I saw other people trying to do it, and they couldn't do it. So that was pretty cool to kind of realize that my network was pretty good. So in a general sense, here are my roles and how it can apply to you guys. Like I said, hold people accountable. Too many times in the past, our reports would get filed and then they just kind of collect dust on the internet. Nobody really pays attention to them. And it's me out there kind of poking the prosecutor with a stick saying, this is too good to pass up. We need to really get this guy in jail or this gal in jail, because if we don't do it, they're just going to move to another job. Everybody's so lawsuit averse these days that when somebody calls up and says, hey, Joe Smith worked for you, what'd you think? They were here. They quit on June 1st and whatever, and nobody's willing to say, yeah, they stole from us. So that person is able to just go on and get another job. So my job is to prevent the bad apples from continuing to do what they've been doing. just some general background on the State Board of Accounts and our general authority and the requirements that are placed upon you guys and all local officials. This statute requires you guys to report anything that you deem to be a material loss. I mean, if your books don't balance and you're off 10 cents, not a material loss. If you're somehow short $100,000, it's material loss or material shortage. What is material? Always err on the side of caution. We would rather receive your report and say, thanks for the info, but your $9 over 4 years, not a big deal. But always err on that side because you don't want us coming back saying, hey, you knew about this since 11 and you didn't tell us about it. So, check with your general counsels, check with your attorneys in your office, and let us know if there's any doubt. And at the end of the day, the other rule you can think about is we don't, from my perspective, from the unit that I direct, I don't care about mistakes. I don't care about somebody who doesn't do things necessarily on time. I care about people who are going into their jobs and figuring out ways to take advantage. So I want malice, I want intent, I want somebody who's stealing from the unit or helping someone else steal or facilitating kickbacks, all of those things. I don't need to know personally about somebody who just doesn't deposit checks until Friday when they came in on Monday or things like that. Little kind of procedural things like that. And you can also boil it down even further, personal gain. It comes down to personal gain. If somebody is compensating themselves above and beyond what they're allowed to compensate themselves, if somebody is using local resources to benefit themselves, that's where my niche comes in. So my requests, some of them are probably a little obvious. Be honest. I don't want to know any of you guys in a negative sense. I don't want to have to come in and investigate any of your offices, but we will. So hold yourself to a high standard and hold everyone that works for you to that same standard. And if you have doubts about somebody, do your own internal investigation to figure out, in conjunction with reporting it to us, figure out what is going on. And don't just expect honesty from somebody, because if you expect it from everybody and you assume it's a natural trait, the sad state of the world is it's not necessarily a natural trait. There's a lot of dishonest people out there. So if something seems strange over and over and over again, you trust your gut on that. If you see something where you're like, wow, every time Judy balances the drawer, it's $20 short. Every time Bob does it, it's fine. You may be onto something. Maybe Judy shouldn't be balancing the drawer anymore. Maybe you need to set up another system of kind of segregation of duties, or, set Julie up. I mean, I hate to sound so devious with it, but you are the masters of your own domain. You have to figure out these problems, because there are repercussions for you if you don't. I mean, you are expected to construct an office that supports honesty in your operations. And if we come in later on and we say, well, we see these emails from so-and-so saying that Judy may be stealing from you, and then for the next 3 years you let her continue to handle all the money, that may come back on you. So you have a duty to be proactive in ensuring the honesty of your office. And in every one of our cases, and the Konauer one is a great example, there's two elements. There's somebody who is honest, which is hopefully a standard in almost every situation, but that person also has to have the courage to stand up for what they believe is right and stand up against what they believe is wrong. And it's hard to be a whistleblower. I know some of the positions are, to expect a secretary in your office or a bookkeeper who's, maybe barely making over minimum wage and has kids and all that, to expect them to somewhat put their job at risk to report that somebody else is stealing. I know some of the smaller counties and even the larger ones, they can be kind of cutthroat. I mean, if you report somebody and they find out they reported you and that person has a position of authority over you, it could mean your job. So we understand that it's difficult to kind of take that moral stand, but we only find out about things when people are willing to do the right thing. So, and there's also ways that, if you suspect something's going on and you report it to us, we can bring the state police in, we can bring the FBI in, and we can find out ways of proving the case without outing the whistleblower. So there's lots of different ways. Don't think that anytime somebody reports a theft to us, we're just going to walk right up to the person that that we suspect and say, hey, Karen said you were stealing all this money. I mean, we're a little smoother than that. So how to detect it? I mean, you guys run your offices, and I assume most of you have been doing it for many years. Nobody knows your processes better than you. So you know how it runs when it's running smoothly. You know how it runs when it may not be running smoothly. So just we ask that you just kind of take just examine it closely when you think something's up, and try to figure out where the hijinks are occurring. Like I said, there are a couple of instances when, say, somebody goes on vacation and everything's just perfect when they're gone. You know, cash balances, the office runs smoother, deposits are on time, nothing gets held up, and then they come back and you kind of grind back to where you were before. You know, you may be onto something there. Statistical anomalies in the sense that deposits are larger on somebody's day off, and you know, a deposit spikes on when somebody's out of the office. Another one there. Credit cards are a huge issue. We'll get to that later, but down in, I believe, it's not Monroe. Maybe it was Monroe County. Angie Lawson, does that ring any bells to anybody? Owen. Good old Owen County. Angie Lawson was having county credit cards, the statements sent to her home address. Huge red flag. So keep an eye out for things like that. You know, if it's a perfect world, nobody would have credit cards other than the people at the highest levels, or nobody would have access to them. But those are a huge means for fraud. People who are overly protective of their job duties. People who kind of have their little niche and they don't want to give it up. Something's up. I mean, I was just telling some of our field supervisors out there that nobody's happy to see the State Board of Accounts roll into their office and say, hey, it's time to audit. You know, like nobody's going to start, you know, breaking out the punch bowl at that point. But it's a red flag to us when people are furious that we're there. So we all have our job responsibilities and our job roles, and I may not trust anybody to do mine as well as I'm going to do them, but I'm not going to be furious if somebody says, hey, can I take this away from you? So if you've got somebody in your job that when they go on vacation, they say, nobody gets in my desk, or nobody handles those deposits, nobody does anything until I'm back, might be something to look into. Living beyond their means. Gambling, drugs, cars, trips, clothing. No one of those, or even sometimes no two of those, is an automatic indication of something going wrong. I mean, for all you know, their wife is a neurosurgeon, or their husband got a giant insurance settlement back in the day, or they've got family money. So just because somebody's making $25,000 a year and comes to work in a Mercedes, we're not gonna automatically think that they're stealing from somebody. But if you've got somebody who is going to the casino every week and you know their husband is disabled, and they, you know, just use your intuition on the combination of these factors. If you think somebody is living well beyond their means, and you couple it with the factors that I talked about before of, the drawer doesn't balance when they're there, or the deposits are weird when they're there, and they seem to just be paying, you know, pulling out 50s every time we go out to Chick-fil-A for lunch, you know, file that away. So what to report? Thefts. Plain and simple. I try to boil this down to just kind of real terms. Thefts can be simple. That's somebody just pocketing a 20 out of the petty cash every week, or it could be complex in the sense of substituting cash for checks and all of the different they're sort of Ponzi schemes in a sense, where you're just rolling the ball down the hill and it eventually catches up to you, but you're stealing things and there's a cover-up involved. Those would be the complex ones. Pay-to-play, kickbacks, and bribes. These are the ones that I wouldn't say the State Board of Accounts is not equipped to handle, but these are the ones where we would be bringing in the FBI almost immediately. And these are really the bread and butter of the FBI as it relates to public corruption. If you've got anybody that you have knowledge of that is essentially abusing their position for their own gain, and it's not just a simple theft, I'm taking money, I'm taking whatever. I mean, this could be as simple as we've had dog catchers or building inspectors who, there was a case in northern Indiana where a building inspector would go out to a commercial property, and the owner of the property is filing a permit to do some renovations on the property or build an addition. Building inspector says, well, I can't grant you this permit. And the guy says, why not? Everything's perfect. And he said, well, I can grant it to you if you use my company to do the work. That's bad. That's a federal felony right there. That is a bribe. So those are the kind of things. Anytime somebody is being compensated above and beyond what their salary stipulates to just do their jobs. Like in the land bank case in Marion County, Reggie Walton, he ran a program where he kind of managed the city's real estate portfolio or the county's real estate portfolio. It's kind of a mix of both. He basically saw a loophole in the program where all of these city-owned distressed properties needed to get off the books. They're not generating income tax revenue, and the city's like, we just need somebody to own these, whether it's a landlord, whether it's an owner-occupant, whatever. We need them off the books. Well, the land bank statutes say it can go to an auction where the opening bid is the appraised value, and it's sort of a market value sale of the property. Or if a nonprofit buys it, they can buy it at a significantly discounted rate for either $1,500 or $2,000 of property. Well, Reggie sees that as an opportunity. So he couples up with a couple nonprofits and says, hey, you need to submit requests to me for properties A, B, C, and D, and I'll get them to you for $2,000. We'll front you the money for the $2,000, and then as soon as that property was in the hands of the nonprofit, Reggie and his partners would resell it on the open market to their investors. So they take a city-owned property, sell it for $1,500 to the nonprofit. Nonprofit then immediately flips it for $15,000, which is still under market value, but it's a bang-bang, same-day transaction on both sales, and Reggie is pocketing $7,000, $8,000 a pop on each property. So that's another one. That's a huge one. If you ever have anything like that going on in your units, or even if it's outside of your office and you hear rumors about it, let me know, because I can be that gateway to the FBI or the state police, and we'll take care of it. Because those are the ones that are difficult to really detect sometimes, because it takes an insider. Reggie and his buddies aren't going to call the FBI on that one. It's somebody else who just gets an inkling of something's going on, and then we can take it to the next level. The old guy rule. I kind of coined this term. Anything you see that you couldn't explain to the oldest, crustiest guy in your town who thinks every tax dollar is wasted, if you can't explain it to him and he doesn't have a problem with it, or if you explain it to him and he has a problem about it, we probably would like to know about it. Like, we just want responsible use of public funds. So if you can't explain what is going on to every member of your county without some huge uproar, we would like to know about it. And I know, you're probably going, you think we can make people happy? I know it's difficult, and I know I'm oversimplifying this. So, at the end of the day, like I said earlier, in the worst case scenario, you guys can theoretically be held responsible for the acts of someone else. So, when you detect something that's going on, take the proactive steps to take care of it. Because if we come in, or the state police comes in, and the FBI comes in, and we tear the place apart, and we find out that in 2013 you had knowledge that this person may be stealing, and you allowed it to continue, not good. So the cover-up is always worse than the crime. So if you know about it and report it, you've pretty much absolved yourself from the responsibility for that. If you either actively cover it up, passively cover it up by not reporting it, it's bad news. So I had to throw this one in. Kind of a sore subject, but don't destroy your phones. Play nice. Don't run a terrible fake punt. So how to report? My email, my State Board of Account email, goes right to my phone here. The thing is, I can't operate on rumors. I can't operate on just, hey, this guy seems to be living above his level. I need your willingness to work with me to substantiate the information further. I understand the need sometimes to submit an anonymous complaint, but they are very hard to act upon, because we don't know if it's vendetta-based. We don't know if somebody is getting a divorce and it's their, brother who's sending this email in to try to screw the wife, or, in a vindictive sense. But anonymous tips are very hard for us to operate on. So if you can develop information and get it to us, that is the best case scenario. I mean, I know it kind of seems like doublespeak because I'm saying report your intuition and all that stuff, but we're going to need more information. Just passing on that information to us is something that we're going to then work with you to develop it further. Sometimes your first instinct is going to be to call the sheriff or call the local police chief or the detective that you've known for 10 years and things like that. And I'll never tell you not to do that, but there are certain pitfalls that come along with that. In some of the smaller communities, everything is so tightly knit. The police chief is the cousin of the highway superintendent and this, that, and the other. So you just have to be very careful about the information and where it flows. And like Marion County, probably not something you have to worry about so much just because it's a broad net of people. Nobody really knows anybody. I mean, there are small circles here and there, but if you report it to the locals, it can complicate matters just because it is extremely difficult for us, and I say us as State Board of Accounts, State Police, FBI, to investigate something after the fact. Once the person is aware that we're looking at them and they start shredding documents or they start covering their tracks, we would much rather get in where nobody knows that we're looking at them and start doing some investigative techniques that are covert, recorded phone calls, recorded conversations, pulling bank records before the word is out. So if you tell the local guys, sometimes that can compromise the investigation as far as just who knows what. And also, they're not always equipped to handle kind of complex financial investigations, so it really is better reported to the state police, reported to me, reported to, let's just get it out of the local area because it really nobody gains when it stays on the local level. The example I always use is if a Republican sheriff is investigating the Republican council chief, whether he investigates that case perfectly or he totally botches it, there is political spin that can be added to that both ways. If he investigates it perfectly and the target goes to jail, well, it was a political ploy by the party, and they just wanted to take that guy out. If he botches the case and the guy goes free, well, that was a setup. It's the cops protecting their own party, yada, yada, yada. And you can twist that anyway, and it could have been completely legitimate. I mean, most criminal cases, I wouldn't say most, but a surprising proportion don't work out, and it's for no devious reason. It just doesn't work. But when you've got local elected sheriffs investigating other elected officials or appointed officials, it muddies the water and nobody really wins. I don't play politics, sadly or not sadly. I don't even vote because I'm just so turned off to the political system. But I know. So I don't want to be associated with either side. So, but I don't play politics, clearly. So if somebody comes to me and says the Republican, the Democrat, the Independent, the Libertarian, the Tea Party, it goes in one ear out the other. I don't care. I narrow it down to what they were doing that was illegal. So, and like I said, I can always be your gateway for that information. I can be the kind of air traffic controller for, oh, I think this is good. It sounds like a state police case. Oh, I think this is good. This is one we can try to work in-house. Oh, that's big enough. It's an FBI case. Or, hey, thanks for the information. Keep me in the loop as things develop. I think you may be onto something, but just keep your eyes out and we'll kind of develop it further because it's not quite to the level where law enforcement is going to take it seriously. So what can happen if you don't report? Oh, you're in violation of that statute that I put up on the slide earlier. And one of the factors that we look at in we're coming up with a special investigations manual because my position is new. We didn't really have a manual for how special investigations are going to work. But in that manual, one of the factors for do we hold the elected official responsible for a subordinate is, were you in violation of a criminal statute as it relates, or a state statute as it relates to the conduct that we're investigating? If we can go back and say, you knew about this on X date and you didn't report it to us, either at all or for 2 years later, you could be on the hook for that. So once again, the recurring theme is we want you to be proactive in this. And it comes down to public perception too. If you don't report it, the public is going to group you in with the bad person. They're going to say you're either part of it, you're asleep at the wheel, you facilitated it, all that. None of that's good for you. And you could have just been like, I'm so focused on my job, I don't have time to deal with this. Public perception is you were on the same team as the bad guy. And I think we all know this from life in general. Tackle a problem early, and it's always better. I think we've all done it 500 times in our lives where you're just like, I don't want to deal with that, I don't want to deal with that. It was putting a new toilet in at my house a couple weeks back. I put it off and put it off and put it off. When I finally did it, I kicked myself for not doing it 3 weeks before because it took me 45 minutes. So be on the cutting edge of reporting these problems, because the earlier you report it, the better you look, the better the chance the investigation has to find out what really is going on, and the less chance of anybody saying, well, why'd she sit on that information for a year? She was in on it. So it really helps everyone, because we can hit you with joint and several liability, which means we know you didn't steal it, but you and the person that did can be held responsible for it, and that can go to your bond. And from what I know about bonds is they come after you after the fact. So don't put yourself in that position. Problem areas, like I said, credit cards, Owen County. I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars to Walmart for DVDs and things like that. I mean, things that had no explainable use for the county. So if you have credit cards for your agency, try to figure out a way to make sure that the purchases on them are legitimate. Make sure all the statements are coming to your office. Make sure somebody's job is to scrutinize them and say, why did you need, The Land Before Time 2 at Walmart last night on VHS? That's not an acceptable expense. Cash, cash, cash. I mean, the most untraceable form of anything out there. If you can avoid having cash in your office, do it, because, sure, there's serial numbers on a bill, but we don't know what it is until it's gone, or we'll never know what it is. So if there's a way to prevent the actual handling of cash by your subordinates or your employees, everybody wins. Anywhere where one person has sole responsibility for a duty. We just had a case indicted this past week in Monroe County involving the lady who worked in the jail handling cash bonds. And she would a person would get put into the jail, they would pay their bond, the sheriff's department would put it in an envelope in a little lockbox. She would then go unlock the lockbox and process all the checks. Well, like I said earlier, she was one of those people that really hoarded her job duties. So she didn't want anybody doing it. When she was out on vacation, nobody touched that box. So if somebody is taking in money and doesn't want to give that up, keep an eye on it. If somebody is just handling tons of money, I know the State Board of Accounts preaches controls and installing controls and things like that, and it's probably so annoying for you guys, but they're there for a reason. I mean, they're there because they prevent fraud. And I know 9 times out of 10, they occupy more of your time and make your job more difficult, but you will thank them when you needed them if they're there, because you will have no problems, hopefully. So how to prevent? Cross-train and rotate job functions if it's possible. And I know I'm kind of talking in this totally ideological, perfect world sense where you have 50 employees who are all capable of doing every job duty, and I know that's not the case. But if you can keep people rotating around to different tasks, it'll help you notice where there are problem areas. Pay closer attention to those areas, the credit cards, the cash, the payments, the checks coming in, the bank deposits, things of that nature. Pull out a monthly, do a little preventative investigation yourself. Pull out a sample of cash deposits and see if you see anything that strikes you as odd. Have one person pull the receipts and then another person pull the deposits. And if you're like, wait, front desk says we took in $15,000, our deposit for that day is only $12,000. Problem. I mean, if you do that for 100 weeks in a row and it's perfect, then great. I mean, you are being proactive about trying to detect fraud. Now, if you do it and you start seeing a pattern, that's what we want. I don't want you to do my job for me, but I want you to be on the cutting edge of what's going on in your office. Scrutinize credit card statements, what's being purchased, where they're being sent, who has them. Try to cut it back to who has them in your offices. Kind of look at it as like does this person really need a credit card? I mean, are they really utilizing it that much to necessitate the city extending or the county extending them credit? Maybe not. The less credit cards you have, the less fraud you will also have. Talk to your employees. I mean, tell them, like, this is not a country club job. Like, I'm not going to cover for you if you're doing something wrong. I would never expect any of my bosses to cover for me if I was doing something improper. So make sure it's out there that your employees are aware, hey, you can't steal from us. This is the public's money. This is your tax dollars coming in. This is my tax dollars coming in. And if we catch something wrong, we're going to the State Board of Accounts. We're going to go to the State Police. We're going wherever we need to go because I won't stand for it on my watch. And then follow the rules. Once again, sort of self-explanatory, but just all of the regulations and rules that come from State Board of Accounts, do your best to follow them as closely to the letter as you can, because like I said, if we find blatant disregard for the regulations that are out there, it can come back on you guys. So just do your best to just run your office the way it's supposed to be run, and hopefully the problems will be minimized. The aftermath, what happens when you do catch somebody? Pretty much everybody that I've ever investigated, somebody comes up to us later in tears and says, how did I let this happen on my watch? How did I hire that person 20 years ago? They were my, kindergarten teacher. I've known this person my entire life. They would never do this. They would never do this. Well, you can't kick yourself too much. I mean, most of these people who are stealing, they've thought it out and they've taken steps to cover up their thefts. So when you look back on what was occurring in your office and it turns out there was a theft, don't beat yourself up too much because they were trying to evade your notice. So hindsight's always 20/20, and you can't be expected to know what was going on with every person when they are going out of their way to keep it from you. Learn from your mistakes. Every time we come in and audit you guys, and there's a couple little comments in there about what could be changed. Take action on those. Do what we say to do as far as making your systems better. And if you have a theft, look at it. I mean, I know in the Owen County case, they're not going to have a lot of credit cards floating around anymore. All statements are going to be required to be mailed right to the county, and there's somebody who's going to be checking those. So learn from your mistakes, make the policy changes that need to be made to prevent the same type of theft from occurring again. And then take it a step further proactively. Look at your problem areas and see if you can say, if I were a person who's handling all this money, could I get away with stealing 20, 30, 40, 50 bucks a day or a week or 200 a month? And if your answer is, man, they probably could, figure out a way to make sure that doesn't happen. So think like a criminal. Think if you were in everybody's position, if you had an opportunity to steal, could you do it? And if the answer is yes, then sit down and we'll talk about it. And if you have a position in your office where you say, man, they could take that money, and I don't think we'd ever know about it, call me up. We'll sit down. You can run me through the procedures that are running in your office, and we'll brainstorm it together. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes on your office is a good thing because I'm not kind of caught in the tradition or the way that things have always been done. So I'm happy to try to look at it from my experience and my background to say, well, what if we did this differently? Is that a possibility? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I'm happy to try to help you guys make your offices better. Like I said in the beginning, I don't want my presentation to be all doom and gloom and you guys are going to be held responsible for everything and things like that, because I don't want you to worry about everything. I mean, I look into criminal violations, and like I said, that is not mismanagement, that is not sloppiness. The other side of the State Board of Accounts is very much about managing your records properly and not accepting sloppiness and things like that, but nobody's going to get hauled off to jail because they're 5 days late on a report. So I don't want you to lose sleep over that I'm just going to show up in your office one day because of a late deposit until it becomes habitual. So and one thing you should take away from this is just personal gain. I get involved when somebody is paying themselves or getting extra value to themselves personally or their family or their business personally from the governmental unit or at the expense of the taxpayers. So it is personal gain. I don't care about sloppy records. I don't care about somebody who's not smart enough to do their job. I care about personal gain. Until somebody's getting money, I am most likely not going to get involved. So, case studies. Speedway fire chief. Does that ring any bells to anybody? Sorry, Marion County. I don't mean to pick on you guys today. But Speedway fire chief is a good example. He was basically just buying all sorts of personal property with fire funds, and it kind of falls into one of my examples. He went on vacation, and somebody found a set of tires at the fire department that didn't fit a single vehicle that the fire department owned. And that's a single set of tires is what spurred our investigation into the fire department. So it's another one of those things where the things you find out when somebody's not at their job. And it turns out he had set up fake companies. He was sending invoices through the council to get approved for bills that didn't even exist to these fake companies that he controlled, things like that. So it's a lesson in, A, like I said, people who the shop works better when they're gone, and then B, how a little bitty inkling of doubt about somebody can quickly spiral into a much bigger investigation. Owen County, I think I've harped on that one enough. City of Gary, that one our report just got released today, and it's about $1.4 million in missing Apple products. So an IT employee in the City of Gary was buying iPads and iMacs and all sorts of Apple products on credit, on the city's credit, and then as soon as they would hit the shop, they were going out the back door. So that'll be on our website today if you're interested in reading about it. But it's another one where who is allowing this many? And we did an inventory of the city. They don't have a single Apple product on hand, and they bought $1.4 million worth. So it's another one, like, how does that go unnoticed? So keep an eye on your purchases, keep an eye on what these purchases are supposedly for, have a good inventory procedure, all of those things. You know, we don't dispute that you might need iPads and phones and computers and all that, but you better have them on hand. They better not show up in Chicago with their serial numbers scratched off. The land bank, talked about that one. And again, here's my contact information. Like I said, the presentation apparently isn't up on the conference website yet, but it will be very soon. So that same slide will be up there as well if you want to either take it down now or just wait for it to hit the internet, whatever is your choice. So I'll open it up now to anybody has any questions about this or questions you always wanted to ask a former cop that you never thought were appropriate. So, any questions from anybody?
I'm sorry, I'm getting old. Okay, in terms of what you would want to be reported, how detailed do you want the information? For example, if someone has suspicions, but they don't have concrete proof of wrongdoing, but there's little pieces here and there, is that enough to report
Sure.
to you?
And I think it would just be the beginning of a dialogue back and forth between you and I. I mean, you would share what information you do have, and I would say, okay, well, do you have access to check this? You know, can we find out if, you know, X, Y, and Z are occurring? And then it just becomes kind of a cooperative effort between you and I on whether there is actually something there.
Okay.
But you don't need to do all the investigation yourself on the front end before you report it to us. So I can be of assistance in that. So, I mean, like I said, I don't want to operate just on rumors and vindictive tales from other people. But if you've got something you sincerely suspect is suspicious, I know that's sort of redundant, but let me know and we'll talk about it. I can either come down and we'll talk in person, or we can email, phone, whatever's best for any of you.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Uh-oh. Coming out of the woodwork now.
What's the statute of limitations on the fraud, or or the theft? Is there a statute there or a limit that isn't looked at?
It depends on who the target is. There is the standard statute of limitations is 5 years in Indiana for crime, basically. The main carve-out that we use, or the main exception we use, is when the target is an elected official. That 5 years doesn't start ticking until they've left office. So in theory, if the theft has been going, I mean, it could go back indefinitely. If they've been in office for 20 years and we don't find out about it until 2 years after they're out of office, we can go right back to the beginning of the fraud. And that was one we actually had to teach to a couple prosecutors because they didn't realize that exception was there. On the federal side, it's also 5 years, but they can wrap in the previous conduct as what they call relevant conduct. And everything on the federal side is based on loss amount. So if we can say, okay, from 2010 to present, the previous 5 years, we have $100,000 loss, we're going to charge that as an actual count in the indictment, but then we'll also add on the relevant conduct a couple years back or however far back we need to go, assuming the records are good enough and we're very confident of the loss. But the statute of limitations rarely slows us down because there are even exceptions to if someone has taken extraordinary steps to cover up the crime. If it's basically when it's either that 5 years when the person leaves office or when the prosecutor should have been given notice about it. So if there's an extreme cover-up on things, the clock doesn't start ticking until it should have been discovered, which is a nebulous date, but the statute has rarely been a problem for us.
What part do the commissioners play in this? We had an incoming official suspicious of some things that were missing when he came into office. Mm-hmm. And it was brought before the commissioners, and they just decided they didn't want to pursue anything since the outgoing was gone. And should that have been brought to your attention on something
Yes.
like that?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I think that statute is pretty clear in the sense that you have a duty to report anytime there's a shortage, and a shortage isn't always money. It could be missing equipment. It could be any of that stuff. So I do believe that the safe way to go is to report it. And like I said, always err on the side of reporting. It's better to report it and we say, okay, thanks, than not to report it, and 2 years later we're like, hey, you knew about that? So err on the side of reporting. Marion County. Oh, you're next.
Could you address grants and how that can become an area of abuse of tax dollars? I'm not saying this is going on, but you know when you kind of feel something in your gut, like we have a number of areas that get grants. They apply for grants, and some they've been getting for 7, 8, get the same grant every year. Mm-hmm. But then what's done with that money out of that grant, once it comes into that fund, you know, who's the keeper of that and the owner of that, and how that money's being spent, who it's being paid to,
right?
For what?
I don't think I have a perfect answer for you, and it's partly due to the fact that I'm not up to speed on every angle of my job responsibility yet, but I do know that grants are administered by whoever the grant provider of funds is. So, and I know the problem with the grants sometimes are that the federal government or whoever it is, they don't have the manpower or the desire or a combination of both to really check up on what that money is being used for. But if you have a grant is usually pretty specific in what the money is supposed to be used for, whether it's, you know, ditches or parks or whatever the case may be. And if you have a situation where grant says A, B, and C, and they did D, E, and F with the money, let me know, and I'll be that kind of air traffic controller to say, okay, yeah, here is the grant document. They didn't do any of that work, and maybe I'll just go right to the provider of the funds, and they'll do an audit. I don't know. Susan, is that something? Do grants normally fall under us as far as? Okay.
Yes, they do.
Okay. So yeah, of course they do. I knew that. So I think she's up, and then you're up.
Yes, Marion County. I'm the new auditor, and I'm not responsible of any of the.
I'm a Marion
folks
County
that-
resident. I can't make you mad.
Two questions. Does this all include wire fraud as under your investigation? And number two is if we present something to you and it just boils down to mismanagement or incorrect information, will you make suggestions to change that? I'm a little concerned about Marion County specifically because
Why?
of Unigov. Well, Unigov itself makes the mayor the county executive. And prior to me taking office, they split the duties of the auditor and the OFM randomly with no understanding of myself, I should say. Somebody must have understood it. And usually we're left out of the audits. We pay to have an audit by BKD, but there's some things that I'm concerned with. Even if it's not illegal, I would still like recommendations on how to feel more comfortable with those processes.
Yeah, well, your first question, wire fraud is a federal statute, and currently State Board of Accounts does not have law enforcement authority, so that's why we always couple with the state police or the FBI. But wire fraud is basically the federal version of theft, and that is the statute we used with Reggie Walton. It was honest services wire fraud, and it's basically, I think I can almost quote the statute verbatim, but it's you have a scheme or artifice to defraud, which basically means you defrauded somebody, and it has to involve wire communications in an interstate manner. And it's kind of one of those funny criminal statutes because interstate manner in a very historical sense means it crosses state lines. But almost everything is an interstate transaction these days with the advent of the internet and check processing. The only time I've ever seen us not be able to get a wire fraud charge on even a paper check was when the check originated from an Old National bank account, was deposited in Indianapolis, and went to another Old National bank account because Old National does all of its check processing in Evansville. Every other bank in this world, Fifth Third does theirs over in Ohio. As soon as that check is processed across state lines, wire fraud.
So
Or
it's based on the
can't qualify as
headquarter
wire fraud.
location.
I'm sorry?
Is it based on the headquarter location?
It depends on their check processing facility. But if you send an email, it hits Google's servers, wherever those are, and bounces back. I mean, I could email you right now, and it's interstate because
Okay.
Google doesn't have a server in Indiana, or at least it probably hits a server outside of the state. So wire fraud is just the federal version of theft, and when a case gets to the threshold of being a federal case, meaning it hits 6 figures easy, wire fraud is going to be the statute they use, and it's easy to get. Don't get me wrong. You don't have to worry about did this cross state lines or was it a scheme or artifice to defraud. Like it's theft on a federal level. To your next point. Yeah, I mean, if you explain a situation to me and I say, it sounds like just stupidity or mismanagement, I'm happy to either personally give you my ideas on what could change, or I could run it by the other directors in the office like Lori, who can say, hey, here's what Marion County's saying. This is striking them as improper or suspicious or needing improvement. What do you think we can tell them on this? And we're happy to do that. I mean, my goal is to not investigate anybody because everybody's honest. So we're here to make you guys better. I don't want to work myself out of a job, but I don't want to investigate anybody. I want everybody to be honest. So if we can help you be better to prevent someone else from defrauding, then great.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just wanted to comment about the grant thing. We just, at the last commissioner meeting, flagged some claims from one of the departments that had a grant. They were going to try to run all their travel through this grant because they were too lazy to get an additional or transfer.
Yeah.
And so I flagged it, gave the commissioners a copy of the grant. It wasn't even at all, shouldn't have been used for that at all, and they declined it.
Yeah.
So there is now a request for an additional. So the auditor can be and should be an old bag. So.
Yeah. Well, and there are all sorts of those little carve-outs of the grants and the economic development commission slash nonprofits that come out, and from my very cynical former law enforcement perspective, they are all mechanisms to circumvent the rules that are in place. Commission approval, there are ways to slide expenses and expenditures under the radar, and they all irk me like that. So if you guys ever see anything where an economic development or a nonprofit or a grant is being abused, let's talk. Anybody else? Well, thank you guys so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of the conference.